Hello and welcome. My name is Sean Lerner. I'm a Ruby on Rails developer. I've been teaching Rails the last few years at a bootcamp called BitMaker, which is part of General Assembly now. And I thought I'd show you a technique that I call method-driven development. So what we're going to do today is try to use the Geocoder gem to figure out the distance between two cities. First, I'll open my terminal, and I'll go onto my desktop and just make a new folder here called Geocoder experiment. Okay, now I've just published a new gem that we're going to be using for this. It's called Interesting Methods. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so what this does is it adds something to all Ruby objects that lets you easily see what are the interesting or useful methods on each object. You can head over here to install it if you wish to also code along and for it to work properly for yourself. There's instructions in the README here. So I'll just install that here. Okay, and I've already followed the other instructions in the README, so it'll work fine for myself. So now, the goal here, again, let's open this up here, and let's just create a README file in this new project. We'll call it readme.mj. And here, so the goal is using the Geocoder gem, figure out the distance between two locations. That's our goal. Okay, and we're going to be using what I've termed method-driven development. Okay, make this a markdown file. There we go. Okay, this is the goal. So what this is we're basically gonna try to figure out how this gem works without actually looking at documentation, looking at Stack Overflow, looking at blog posts. We're just going to try to figure out how this gem works by using methods and looking at what we can get access to from the command line. So let's install the gem. We'll go gem install geocoder. And let's make a little program. Let's call this Toronto to Chicago.rb. We'll open that up in our editor. Toronto to Chicago. Don't need this. Oops, that should be in the README. Let me stick that in the README. There we go. Now, so here we're going to require, well, actually we're not going to do anything there. We're going to actually mainly do everything in Pry. So if you don't already have Pry installed, just install it now. Gem install Pry. Pry, for those who don't know, is like a souped up IRB. So let's go into pry. Now if I just type geocoder, I'll get an error because I haven't yet required geocoder. So it's not aware of that class until I require it. So I'll go require geocoder. And now I can type geocoder and it just reports back that that's the class. So we know that this gem has functionality for looking up addresses and looking up distances between addresses and other useful geocoding functionality, but we don't know exactly what those methods are. So a more kind of simpler way to look at these methods that are available is just to type geocoder.methods. The problem is we're going to get a lot of methods, and that is because we're inheriting, geocoder is inheriting from Ruby's object and other objects, and the methods that come along with those are not necessarily that useful for our purposes. We really just want to get the methods that have been defined directly on geocoder. So geocoder.methods gives us that big list. If we did something like object.methods, which all Ruby objects inherit from, we'd get another big list. So what we're going to do is we're going to take geocoder's methods and we're going to subtract object.methods. And what that does is it leaves us with just the useful methods that have been programmed directly onto the geocoder class. So now the gem that we installed called interesting methods, it's kind of just a shortcut for this. So you could just type geocoder.im and you'll get the same results. So IM stands for interesting methods. A little bigger. Okay, so now we need, remember, let's go back to our goal here for a second. We want to find out the distance between two locations. And the locations are going to be Toronto and Chicago. Okay, so let's go back here. And so let's find Toronto first. So looking at these methods, we've got like address, config, etc. And then here we can see there's a search method. So that's likely the method we're going to be needing to use in order to search Toronto. So let's just give it a shot and see what happens. Geocoder.search Toronto. And this looks pretty good. We've got a result back. It looks like it's Toronto, Ontario, Canada. That's the Toronto I know and the one I wanted. We can see here it's in an array. So you've got that square bracket here and this square bracket here, which means it's a collection, but it's just a collection of one. It's just the one Toronto we want in there. So I need to extract it from that array. Now, a little technique in pry or IRB is if you use underscore anywhere, it will represent the last return value, which happens to be this result in the array. So if I just type underscore and press enter, there it is, that last return value. So what I can do is I can say Toronto equals underscore dot first. And now what that's done is it's taken that first element, the only element in that array, and stored it into my local variable I've just created called Toronto. And here you can see it's no longer in an array, but it is a geocoder result Google object. So let's see. Now let's do the same thing for Chicago. So we'll go Chicago equals geocoder.find Chicago. And now I kind of know it's going to come back in an array and everything. So I'm just going to say dot first. Oops. Not dot find, it's dot search. There we go. Here it is. This looks like the Chicago, Illinois, USA. It's not an array, it's just the geocoder result object. Okay, so now the trick is to find the distance between these two. So now remember here, the goal is not to go online and try to figure it out, but just to finding it using this method-driven development technique. So let's take another look at our geocoder.interesting methods to see what we have available. There's nothing here that looks like it will be useful for finding out distances. We could also take our Toronto or Chicago objects and look at the interesting methods on those. Okay, here's the Toronto one. It has a lot more methods, but I don't see anything that's useful for calculating distances between. So let's see what else Geocoder has to offer. If I do geocoder.constants, it'll give me all the classes that have been namespaced underneath the geocoder. So basically everything that Geocoder came with. And we've got like ways of configuring it, calculations, logger, result, IP address. And I happen to know, I had to look this up, that the distance methods are underneath calculations. So let's take a look at what that has to offer. So the way you access that is geocoder : calculations. I like to press enter just to make sure I didn't make a typo. And now I'll do the .im and see the interesting methods. Okay, so here's a lot of really good stuff. Like these distance betweens, I'm sure, are the ones that we're going to need to use to figure out the distance between Toronto and Chicago. So let's take a look at, let's just try it. Distance between. It will complain about number of arguments likely, but let's just try it just to get an idea of what it wants. It wants 2 or 3 arguments. Okay, so let's give it a shot. Distance between Toronto and Chicago that we've loaded up in our local variables. Not a number. See down here, nan, not a number. Okay, so that means we have to figure out how to use this method. So fortunately, because we're in Pry, we can use PryDoc to look up the documentation without even leaving the REPL on this method. So to use PryDoc, just put a question mark in front of this, and then you've got the documentation. Now, you may get a prompt saying you need to install PryDoc if you've never used it before, but it's pretty simple to install it, and then you can use it. So here we go. This does exactly what we want, calculates the distance between 2 points on Earth. And this is what it wants. It wants either, there's 3 options, an array of coordinates, a geocodable address, a geocoded object, one which implements 2 coordinates method. Okay, so let's see if Toronto implements a 2 coordinates method. Well, I'll go Toronto.interesting methods. Now there's a lot to go through there, so I'll show you another technique. And what you can do is you can grep, which is basically a filter down the method you want. So I'm going to go Toronto.interestingmethods.grep, and then I'll pass into grep coordinates because I know it's going to be 2 coordinates. And here it is. There's one method, coordinates. Now it's not 2 coordinates, it's just coordinates. And I know, so it looks like Toronto and most likely Chicago don't have 2 coordinates methods on them. But they do have this coordinates methods. And besides, earlier, if you remember, when we tried to use distance between, we couldn't. So obviously there is no 2 coordinates on either of these. But let's give it a shot with these coordinates and see how that works. Coordinates. Ah, that looks good. It's a number. I don't know if it's miles or kilometers, but we can kind of keep on going to figure that out too. So let's take a look at the docs again without leaving our REPL. And at the bottom here, we can see how you can also pass in the units, miles or kilometers. Or actually, you can configure it. So let's give that a shot. Let's go here, units, and we'll go kilometers because I'm in Canada. Now that's a different number. The 701 kilometers is different than 435 from, which is most likely miles. Let's just confirm that. Yeah, the 453 is miles, and the 701 is kilometers. And that is method-driven development. So anyways, whenever I'm exploring a new gem, or if it's just a technology or a class or something I'm not familiar with, I'll start looking at the methods, seeing if I can get documentation, and I try to do all this without ever leaving my REPL. Okay, hopefully you learned something. Thanks.